Sometimes when we are putting a service together, the person who is choosing things like the collect will speak to the person who is preaching. Other times we don't. This morning is one of those occasions when we didn't speak to each other about which collect Nadine would choose and how I would structure this sermon. However, someone obviously knew what was going on because Nadine has chosen the perfect collect for this morning. Normally we get an option of two. The other one is quite a long one. She's obviously chosen the shorter one, which perfectly fits what I'm going to talk about. So I'm just going to read it to you again, just to show how sometimes we think we're doing it. We're not really. It's God that's in control. The collect that Nadine shared with us is, God of truth, help us to keep your law of love and to walk in ways of wisdom that we may find true life in Jesus Christ, your Son. The focus there being, keep your law of love. Some of you might remember an episode of Hancock's Half Hour called Sunday Afternoon at Home. It starts with much sighing, and Tony asks Sid James what time it is. 2:00 comes back the answer. There's some more sighing. Some moments later he asks again, and he's told it's still 2:00. Oh no, it's 1 minute past 2. I do hate Sundays, Tony says. Every Sunday is the same. Nowhere to go, nothing to do. I wonder, is this what observing the Sabbath is all about? Boredom, nowhere to go, nothing to do. As you will have noticed, both today's readings teach about the Sabbath. Deuteronomy gives an account from the 10 Commandments to keep the Sabbath holy, whilst in the Gospel, we Pharisees are forced to question what this commandment really means. In Deuteronomy, we're given considerable detail about what this commandment says and how to apply it. Unlike some commandments which are only a few words long, thou shalt not steal, for example, this commandment tells us that this day without labor is for all, for our families, for our servants, for our animals even, for the foreigners, which in this context means those who are not Jewish. It is to show that the Jewish people are different and that they value what God has done in their lives. And it even mentions the exodus from slavery in Egypt. This day is a day when we are to remember what God has done and does do and will do for us in our lives. Though a rather trivial example, I'm reminded of the importance of sending a thank you letter for a birthday gift to show that what the sender has done for us is valued and appreciated. The Sabbath is one way in which we can thank God. But then we have this rather interesting incident in Mark's Gospel. I wonder, perhaps you've been out walking, possibly on the Sabbath, and you've noticed some ripe blackberries. So you pick a few and pop them in your mouth. You might do it without thinking, except perhaps to make sure that they were above dog height. And you enjoy them for a moment and then move on, a small interlude before you continue your walk. No big deal. And I wonder whether it was the same for the disciples, almost absent-mindedly plucking a few ears of corn as they walked past it standing there in the field. In Mark, we're not told why they did this, or even if they ate them. In the other two accounts of the incident, we do get a little more detail. In Matthew, we're told that the disciples were hungry, whilst in Luke, we find out that they rubbed the corn in their hands, presumably to remove the husks, and then ate them. But surely no big deal. But it is. They've been seen by some Pharisees, people who believe in a very, very strict observance of the law. This is happening on the Sabbath. You're not to do any work on the Sabbath, on the day of rest. Now, a brief aside, you might be sitting there thinking, they picked corn from someone else's field. Surely they broke the commandment, thou shalt not steal. Surely that's the issue. Well, Deuteronomy 23:25 specifically deals with this, in case you're wondering if you're out walking in a cornfield. And it says, if you enter your neighbour's grain field, you may pick kernels with your hands, but you must not put a sickle to their standing grain. So don't take your sickle out with you when you go walking. Or indeed, you might remember the story of Ruth, where the poor and the widows are allowed to collect the gleanings from the field, the grain that's been left behind as the harvesters pass by. The plucking of the ears of corn is not the issue. It's the day on which the disciples have done it that bothers the Pharisees. To be helpful, I've typed helpful in bold inverted commas for reasons I hope will become clear. To be helpful, a list of activities forbidden on the Sabbath had been produced. There were 39 of them. Number 3 being, do not reap. The Pharisees have got Jesus and his followers. They have broken the law. Clearly they're not good law-abiding Jews. And as we hear at the end of the gospel passage, they plot to have Jesus killed. Though interestingly, in so doing, they conveniently forget that to the Pharisees, the Herodians also don't keep the law. But if they can help them get rid of Jesus, well, it seems that they're happy to overlook that little matter. It's not surprising, really, that on numerous occasions, Jesus calls the Pharisees hypocrites. Another aside for you, because it bothered me when I was reading this, reaping technically means harvesting. Indeed, Webster's dictionary defines it as to cut with a sickle, scythe, or reaping machine. Plucking a few grains does not actually constitute reaping. But the Pharisees were looking to catch Jesus and his followers, catch them out. So even though they believed in a very strict observance of the law, they bent it here to suit their argument. Again, I can see why Jesus called them hypocrites. So how does Jesus respond to this accusation? He reminds those present of the time when David and his followers were so hungry that they ate the bread of presence, the consecrated bread or the showbread in the temple, which should only be eaten by the priests. If you really want to look this up, because I did, it's in Leviticus 24, the rule about only the priests eating the showbread. Or in the second incident, he challenges those in the synagogue whether it is lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do evil. And we note that those he asked remained silent, not because they knew it would be wrong not to help the person in need, but because their very helpful set of rules meant that if they were to say the man should be healed, that would risk them doing some form of work on the Sabbath, and so breaking the rules. So has Jesus come to replace the law, to replace all these rules? Does following Jesus mean we no longer need to observe the Sabbath? In Matthew 5, Jesus tells us, "Do not think I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." Indeed, repeatedly, Matthew gives us examples of how Jesus is doing this. Jesus has not come to tell us that we no longer need to observe the Sabbath, but that he wants us to understand the reason behind it, its true purpose. God gave us the Sabbath not to be an excuse to not help those in need. It was not a time so hidebound with rules that you needed to be an expert in the law to know what was and was not permitted. And rather mischievously, as I sat writing this, I began to wonder whether the Pharisees actually were doing their work when they mentally checked the list of forbidden activities so that they could accuse Jesus. So in effect, they were breaking the Sabbath according to their own interpretation of it. But anyway, no, that's not what Jesus is saying. Jesus is saying that the Sabbath was given as a gift to us and that we were not made for the Sabbath. I expect some of you will remember the account in Matthew when he's asked by the Pharisees which was the greatest commandment. Again, they were hoping to trap him with their rules about the law. And he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and the greatest commandment. And the second is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. All the law and the prophets hang on these two commandments." All of the law. Loving God and loving one another is the root of all that we should do. And if in applying the law we're not loving God and loving our neighbour, we're just not doing it right. If we refuse to help someone with a shriveled hand because it's the Sabbath, not only are we not showing love to our neighbour, but we're not honouring God, because God wants us to show love to one another. Hence the appropriateness of the collet that Nadine chose this morning. But, and this is a very important but, this doesn't mean that we should just carry on day in, day out, doing the same thing, doing our normal activity or work. God has given us the Sabbath to remind us that we need to stop, to pause, to recharge. After all, even during the creation story, God took a day to pause and recharge. And in so doing, we are honouring God. We should see this as an opportunity to remember and to thank God, to offer praises and worship, and to remind ourselves what is at the core of our Christian faith: a loving relationship with God and a loving relationship with one another. And just as if we are in love with a fellow human, we want to and we enjoy spending time with them. Our love for God means that we want to spend time with God. The Sabbath is a time for us to remember this, a regular time in the rhythm of our lives when we pause the ordinary, daily activities to spend some time renewing and refreshing our relationship with God and with those around us, and also with ourselves. And it's not a rigorous or difficult set of rules and constraints to which we must adhere. After all, you don't spend time with those you love because a set of rules say you must. You do it because you want to, because you love them. Now, you might have noticed that throughout, other than when I mentioned Tony Hancock at the beginning, I've used the term Sabbath rather than Sunday. This has been intentional. It's not just because for the first Jewish audience of Jesus' teaching, the Sabbath wasn't on Sunday, but also because the nature of our world today means that some people do need to work on a Sunday. Medical personnel, transport workers, even those leading services in church. So for some, their Sabbath might be on a day other than Sunday. Yes, for many, Sunday might be the best day for us to renew our relationship with God and with those we love and with ourselves. But for those for whom it's not possible on a Sunday, it's still important that they have this time to do this, to set apart from their weekly rhythm of their life. But it's not because the rules written down thousands of years ago say they should. but because it's a good, healthy way to live. And unlike Tony Hancock, who found his Sabbath, his Sunday afternoon, to be a burden and a drag, we should use this time to be refreshed mentally and physically and, of course, spiritually. How we do this can vary. For some, it may involve an activity in nature, such as a long walk, marveling at creation. For others, it might be a time spent in quiet solitude. However, whatever works best for you, remember that all is perspective. To a worm digging in hard ground is far more relaxing than fishing.
Are you ready? Are you sat comfortably? Paying attention, please. Notice time. Right. Just to confuse everything, tomorrow we are having sparklers. Although the schools have an inset day, we actually thought it would be lovely for our babies and toddlers to bring along their primary school and junior school siblings. So sparklers tomorrow, if you're passing the church or you fancy a coffee, and I know there's going to be some lovely cakes or cookies, so please do come and join us. That's from 10 o'clock until 11:30. Now, this is a plea from my heart, Sally's heart, Matthew's heart, everyone's heart, really. We need a volunteer to do our bookkeeping. If that's you, please speak to Sally. If you know someone, please encourage them and let Sally know. So please pray about that. That the right person feels on their heart to do our bookkeeping. And then the next thing I'd like to draw your attention to is that that St Andrew's Bookshop in Great Missenden is holding its first Christian Literature Festival. I've had a quick look at the speakers, the authors, and there are some very interesting ones there. So I encourage you, go onto their website, have a look and book yourself on, or let me know and I'll help you do that if you can't. Now, I'm not going to list all the music events, all the concerts, the workshops that are happening. We are so fortunate here at St Mary's. So I encourage you to take a look at the weekly email update. If you would like a hard copy, there was some lying about actually, but if not, just speak to me and I can run through the update with you. But there's lots of music concerts happening in June. And also a date for your diary, our next church walk is on Sunday the 30th of June. That's it.